Welcome back to the news here on Hilaal TV. This is, of course, our interview section. And we're going to be starting off with one of the developing stories that are happening right now from the courts in Johannesburg. And that is, of course, the legal battle between MK Party leader Jacob Zuma and the MK Party founder Jabulani Khumalo. Now, of course, Jabulani Khumalo is making allegations that Duduzile Zuma Sambundla, the daughter of Jacob Zuma, had forged signatures which made Jacob Zuma the eligible leader of the party, whereas Jacob Zuma is saying, well, I am the leader because I was elected to be so. Now, to give a legal understanding of this, I'd like to welcome legal analyst Rasheed Smith. Rasheed, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and shukran so much for joining us.
Wa alaikum salam. Jazakallah for having me.
It's a pleasure. Rasheed, it's quite ironic because, we're coming out of a weekend where the MK Party, unseated the EFF as the third largest party in the country. So, to think that just 24 hours after all of this has happened, both Jabulani Khumalo and Jacob Zuma are back in court battling to who will lead the third biggest party in the country.
This is something that we should have had an idea of prior, knowing Jacob Zuma's political brilliance, knowing his strategic efforts for the ANC, both when they were in power and prior to them being a liberation movement. We should have known that something along these lines could have made such a huge impact, and we are seeing it playing out in front of our eyes as we speak.
Rasheed, let's speak timeline, because this is going to be very important. Now, we've got just under 2 weeks before a new cabinet needs to be established. Mm-hmm. The MK Party is now becoming a party that could be in the coalition negotiations, mm-hmm. not just in nationally, but also provincially, especially in KwaZulu-Natal.
Of course.
Now, with this court case from an internal perspective happening in the MK, what is the timeline for the MK Party, or for the electoral court, to make a decision so that stability from their side, but also where the country is going from a coalition talks, should the MK Party be involved?
Yeah, good question. This morning we have heard that the electoral court has reserved judgment, and they are yet to give us a date on which that judgment will actually be given. So what a reserved judgment means is that the court is going to take its time in order to apply their mind. The judge needs to apply his mind not only to the pleadings, but to the argument that was heard in court on the day. We have to bear in mind the fact that this case came on urgency. So it gave the court a very small window to acquaint themselves not only with the pleadings, but to apply themselves to what is being argued. And then it has to deliberate on the arguments made by the senior counsel on the day. So a reserved judgment means that it's going to sit back, reserve itself, apply its mind to the facts, apply its mind to the pleadings, and then communicate a judgment at a later stage. Given that this thing has to be done on urgency, I foresee that this judgment may be communicated at a later point this week, if not early next week at the latest.
Rasheed, witnesses are going to be important. And I was at the ROC this week. You were also observing things that were happening. There's a strong support for Jacob Zuma within the MK Party ranks, given he's the leader, and I put it in that case because we saw the courts need to decide who is the actual leader of the party. So his face was on the ballot. This is going to be testing, isn't it? Given that the witnesses that are going to come are really going to have to make a compelling case for him. But then on the Jabulani Khumalo side, he's going to have to bring witnesses that are going to make it compelling for him. But he's maybe potentially on the back foot, given that there's a huge popularity for Jacob Zuma right now.
Yeah, correct. Those witnesses may not be particularly important for the case that was heard this week because it was done on the paper. So there'll be no oral argument further than what has already been heard. But as they've been alleged, there are more than 8 eyewitnesses who were there when Mr. Khumalo actually signed over his power to Jacob Zuma. So how they then choose to take that, whether that goes to a further political forum, whether that goes to a judicial forum, whether that goes back to a similar court, that's going to actually be the crux of this whole matter. But outside of that, the allegation is made that a signature was forged. That needs to be something that must be deliberated upon, because that could in itself cause the decision whether it's an internal decision or an external decision, it could sway it the way of Mr. Khumalo if that is proven. If not, then I mean he could be tried for perjury because that was part of his submissions to the Electoral Court. It could have other criminal implications as well. So it's going to be very interesting over the next coming weeks how this thing plays out. But it's not going to be smooth on either side.
Let's talk of these allegations by Jabulani Khumalo on Duruzile Zuma Sambudla that she had forged the signature of her father. Now, let's start off an overall forging of signatures. You've been a lawyer in the corporate space. You understand company law. In South Africa, has this been an occurrence that has been happening for quite some time? Talk to us about that, and how does this get dealt with in the legal fraternity, but also in the corporate space?
Sure. I mean, not only in the corporate space, but in the succession space as well. So you'll find that a lot of forgery happens when people are contesting wills, last will and testaments. You'll find that a will has been forged so that someone can get a benefit that they may not have received given the original will. This also happens with share certificates. It happens with contracts. It happens all the time. So our courts in that regard actually have developed themselves, and they are very much acquainted to this thing coming about, whether it's in the criminal space, corporate, wherever that may be. So there are ways in which this thing can be analyzed, and experts have emerged over the years. Handwriting analysis can be done. So if a particular document is being alleged to have been forged, that document must then be analyzed against a number of signatures from the actual individual. Then an analysis is made based not only on the type of strokes and hand marks being made, pen impressions, even when and how the pen lifts from the paper at certain points while the signature is being made. All that then gets analyzed, and it has to be compared to that particular document that they are saying is actually a fraudulent document. And then an analysis is made. Either that's going to be given in a formal expert report, or in the instance where an expert witness is called at a trial, he'll then be able to give that evidence. But an expert has to come in and proclaim on such issues. So our legal space is actually quite acquainted with these things happening, because we have dealt with it over the years, not just in corporate, not just in criminal, but wherever a signature may be applied. So even our banking system is aware of this. So we have the necessary resources to make sure that an allegation like this can actually be analyzed and a proclamation can be made.
If it's found that Duruzile Zuma had forged the signature, on what counts would the fraud be? But then I want to bring her father into the picture, because already he has a sentence of contempt of court. Talk to us about that, because this could be quite damning for both father and daughter.
Interestingly, in the court proceedings themselves, it was said that bringing this to the Electoral Court may not have been the correct forum, which I agree with. I mean, forgery is a criminal act. So this may have been ventilated through the criminal system. So if it is found that these allegations are true, then the criminal aspect kicks in, and that will obviously apply to Mr. Zuma's daughter. To the extent that he was involved or orchestrated such forgery or went along with it, then of course he's an accessory to the crime, and then it may also have bearing on him. But we do know that the MK party, once they are in power or have some form of power, they are looking for the allegations against Mr. Zuma in terms of his contempt to be removed. They actually want to make sure that those charges in their entirety are wiped from his record. So if those things play out at the same time, it may be a situation where that doesn't come into play, because the MK party, through their political influence, takes that away from his record. If not, then of course the criminal implications of that will be damning, not just for him, but for the party as a whole.
Yeah, and of course, looking for the presidential pardon, that could be it also, because President Jacob Zuma still faces those criminal charges. Constitutional Court, Rasheed, I mean, Jacob Zuma is no stranger to the Constitutional Court. He's been there. What are the chances that this very case between himself and Mr. Jabulani Khumalo reaches the Constitutional Court, which could drag even more time ahead of that cabinet announcement with regards to the 7th administration?
Look, we have to first and foremost understand the jurisdiction of the Constitutional Court. The jurisdiction of the Con Court is for the interpretation or enforcement of the Constitution itself. So to the extent that a constitutional breach exists in this case, that will then determine whether the ConCourt has jurisdiction or not. From what we've heard during oral argument on Monday, I don't see any constitutional arguments having been made, nor do I think that a case of this nature will have any constitutional backing, because we don't have interpretation or enforcement issues here. Like the IEC has themselves said, that this is more an internal political issue, more than it is even an issue for the IEC themselves. So for the ConCourt to then have overarching jurisdiction, I don't see that happening.
Interesting to see how things will play out with regards to that. Rasheed, Jazakallah so much for joining us here on Hilaal TV. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
That's Rasheed Smith, legal analyst, just breaking down the MK party's internal battle that's happening between its leader, Jacob Zuma, and its founder, Jabulani Khumalo. After the break, we continue with elections. I'm going to speak into the IEC just to take stock of the elections that have just been completed. Do stay tuned to the news here on Hilaal TV.